Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back, everyone, to FusionAuth TownHall version 0.5 here in the early parts of November. It's actually our Friday at FusionAuth. Tomorrow is Veterans Day, and we're lucky enough to get it off, so I'm pretty excited about that. First up, last week we covered a whole bunch of stuff. We had release 1.48.1 that came out. We were pretty stoked about that. A lot of news with our funding, which we might get into with our guest today. But the biggest thing I wanted to mention was my background. No, I'm just kidding. It's not my background. The biggest thing today that I wanted to get into was our docs update. So I just want to show that off for a second here. So this screen might look very similar if you've been on our docs page lately. However, the next couple screens that we get into here on our quick starts have changed a little bit. So we're completely running Astra now. I shouldn't say completely, but for the most part, we're running Astra on all of our different pages. Now, the cool part, and one of the biggest reasons that we kind of went down this path, is for you as the community and people out there that want to check this out, are to help us keep these things like bug free, make suggestions, PR back to us. When I first joined, we were kind of doing things in, I think, ASDoc, which was frustrating for probably most people updating it. There's still some of that floating around in our repo, but the kind of the core of everything at this point, and Lyle will probably kill me because I don't know this exact numbers, but at this point, we actually have everything in Markdown. So the cool part about this, so here's the Next.js quick start that I wrote. When this is out here, you can click on this edit on GitHub now, and it should open up. And if it doesn't, let me know. But it should open up to the correct MDX file, so we can write anything in MDX and Astro components that we want. So some of the cool parts out here now that we're doing, we can keep everything consistent with this remote code module. And you'll notice when you look at that, there's a ton of like code floating around out there. Well, in reality, this remote code is pulling that from our repos. So we can actually keep our repos up to date correctly. And this will just pull in that information from those repos every time the build comes on. Oh, we got some fun comments, but before I show some of these, I want to introduce our special guest today, Mark Van Oppen. How's it going, Mark?
It's going very well. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Do you want to tell the folks online here who you are, what your title is at FusionAuth, and maybe a little bit of backstory about yourself?
Sure. So, my name is Mark Van Oppen. I'm based in Kirkland, Washington, of Costco fame, and I'm the vice president of sales for FusionAuth. So, all things kind of go to market, pricing and packaging, and customer related is our purview. And we tend to have very long-term relationships with our customers. So, I like to be tied to existing customers and sort of the long-term health of those relationships, as well as net new customers and net new relationships.
We've got a couple familiar faces out in the crowd today. So Blair's auth game is leveled up because he uses Fusion Auth, of course. Aaron, on the other hand, very interesting, is containering away with K8s.
Nice.
Sorry, I had to get those out there before I completely lost it. So Kirkland fame, the Kirkland brand then comes from Kirkland. Wow.
Indeed. Yeah, the
I
first
literally
Costco
didn't
is
know
about a
that.
mile away.
That's amazing. That's really cool. So Mark and I were talking beforehand. And I was like, "Oh, please save this story. I have to talk about it because it's so amazing." So I'm looking at his background, and of course, I keep talking about backgrounds today for some reason. And I'm like, "Why do you have Thor's hammer above you? Can you break down for the audience why you have what I assume is Thor's hammer?"
It is indeed Thor's hammer, and it is indeed properly weighted. Although I don't think there's any component of honor required to hold it. It's just large and heavy and feels fun to carry around. But I'm a tall guy, so I'm 6'5", and when I was working at a startup called Heptio, we there was some joke around Thor, and I wound up with a Thor hammer on my desk. And this logo is Heptio. And Heptio is a company founded around Kubernetes, actually. It was two of the three inventors or creators of Kubernetes founded the company. And the name of Kubernetes, when it was an internal project at Google, was Project 7 of 9, which is a Star Trek reference. And one of the first production deployments of Kubernetes at scale was Pokemon Go. And so this is an early Kubernetes logo and an unlicensed Pikachu in front of the Kubernetes logo, referencing one of the first large-scale Kubernetes deployments in production, which was obviously right around that Pokemon Go kind of hype cycle where everybody was running around Central Park trying to catch Charizard.
My son's still running around catching Pokemon, so it's working.
That's an okay pursuit.
Maybe they were able to scale down some of those containers, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Here, but I'll have to just leave it in the background for us.
And we love family at FusionAuth. Tell me about your Kennedy piece.
Yep. So I'm the father to one wonderful daughter named Kennedy, soon to be two here in about a month. So that'll be very exciting. My wife is ready to evict her passenger, and that'll be a fun new development for us. But this is a bumper sticker actually from 1960 when Kennedy was not yet a nominee for president, and he gave a speech in L.A. At some hotel there, and my dad, when he was 8 years old, went to that and wrote on the back of this sticker John F. to remember this guy's name, and he wrote on it that he was excited about visiting this speech because he gave out free Cokes, and my 8-year-old father thought that was really cool, and I had no idea this sticker existed. Named my daughter Kennedy, and he pulls it out of a file, tells the story, and gives it to us because her name is Kennedy, and so I have a fun sticker in my background.
That's absolutely awesome story.
Yeah.
I love it. That's so cool.
It's super fun, and it's just sort of personal trinkets and memories, right?
Yeah, that's super cool. I love it. All right, let's dive in. Let's get our hands dirty. Talk
Sounds
to me
good.
first about. I left this out of the news, and I said we'd kind of talk about it a little later. What's this 65 million deal? Like, what's going on? What's the big news here?
Yeah. So we actually just took funding from a private equity firm called Updata Partners. Updata is really focused on finding companies that need rocket fuel. So the whole premise is finding healthy companies that are onto something, usually very, very lightly capitalized, usually well outside the Bay Area, but they're doing something right. And there's usually a need for liquidity, or there's a need for kind of extra rocket fuel to take advantage of a market opportunity. And we got to talking to them, and they decided to place a $65 million bet on the future of our business and the market opportunity and the potential growth we have ahead. So this should be the only funding we intend to take. We're really excited about the opportunity that it affords us, and it just seemed to be a like-minded group of people that recognize the value of a developer tool, about developer software, or developer-centric software, and what we could do in the market. So we had a great time talking to them, and over the last 6 months, and it came together. And now we're on the Updated team, and we get to fist bump and high five and continue to do the same thing we've been doing, but hopefully faster and bigger and larger.
Wait, I thought we were all going to Hawaii, taking a little break.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think there's now, a monthly all hands in varying exotic destinations.
Perfect.
We'll really do our best to burn through that money as fast as possible.
All right. That was the answer I was hoping for. I was missing out on that.
Yeah. Sorry, I omitted that feature. Yeah.
So the title of today's talk is why choose FusionAuth, and I think we can't really dive into FusionAuth until you kind of break down the parts of authentication and like why it's such a difficult piece. We hear like I would say at least once a month, if not every other week, this breach, this data thing, like all over the place, things are happening. Can you break down a little bit more of like why it's not even an option to kind of not have auth?
Yeah. So before I dive into why this is a hard problem, I think it's important to share my background and my perspective a little
That's
bit.
fair. Yeah.
I've spent the last 10 or 12 years in open source technology, and primarily core infrastructure. My first exposure to core infrastructure was a company focused on private cloud as a service. So it was OpenStack built on KVM on Supermicro hardware with like an HA proxy load balancer up front, right? This is a prepackaged drop-in private cloud built on open source components. And that company was called Blue Box Group. And we were eventually acquired by IBM. And I stayed at IBM for a while. But the whole concept here was people want more control of the underlying infrastructure that is serving a critical app in their sort of customer story. It doesn't really matter what that app was particularly doing, but for whatever reason, they wanted control down to the infrastructure layer, down to the underlying cloud OS that was serving that production application. And so I learned a lot about where people care and or don't care about the control points and the components and the APIs they're interacting with, and why that matters. Fast forward a couple years, and I left IBM to join Heptio. And I mentioned Heptio just a bit ago when talking about Thor, but Heptio was founded by two of the three creators of Kubernetes. So again, we're at this interesting point where folks want to consume an open source piece of software, and we built a business around helping drive some conformity in the community around Kubernetes, right? The CNCF community that governs Kubernetes itself was really trying to figure out ways to put guardrails on it. How do we make Kubernetes look like Kubernetes regardless of where you're consuming it? And some of that work we did helped drive consistency so that EKS and AKS and all the other managed Kubernetes services out there look and feel the same. They're very fundamentally consistent in what you consume as an operator. And all of that kind of got me to understand, even through an acquisition to VMware and then running a sales team at VMware, it got me to sort of understand what the people need and what people care about when they're serving a critical part of their infrastructure that supports production users, right? What do they care about when it's like this tier one component that is important for a production application? That led me a couple years ago to leave VMware and come to FusionAuth. So what appealed to me about FusionAuth was the auth problem statement. And that kind of is the segue into what your original question, which is what is auth? Why is it hard? What's the big deal about auth? And I think that's really three components, right? Over the last 10 years, we've watched infrastructure get inherently more complicated, right? This is not a legacy application that you could run locally and really not change more than maybe once or twice a year. You have this component of distributed systems, distributed infrastructure, balancing traffic across all kinds of different microservices, and having a whole bunch of new interaction points. And that sort of modern infrastructure evolution has gone hand in hand with what we've all witnessed as consumers, that auth is a required component of virtually everything we do, right? Going to the grocery store, you have to type in your phone number to check out at the grocery store. And that ties to a profile, whether you've claimed it or not, that ties to a profile around your purchase history and the targeted ads and everything associated with that. You have the same sense of identity associated when you buy a pair of jeans at gap.com, right? When you sign up for any given service or you pay a utility bill online, there's a customer identity and access management component with virtually every business out there. So it's gotten more complicated. It's become fundamentally non-optional because businesses can't forego the intelligence they get from the user identity and the user population that's interacting with them. And it needs to be performant, reliable, and scalable in a way that is fundamentally harder than it used to be. So the choice around how you solve that and why it's a difficult problem has become more and more interesting. And I felt like this wasn't going away, and I liked FusionAuth's approach to it and got excited about working here. So I convinced them to hire me, and here I am.
I love it. It's such a unique and yet covers every aspect of what led you to FusionAuth too, because I think that product makes sense totally in the way that FusionAuth was built. It's not like this SaaS service that's just sitting out there. It could be like we can host for you, but it's also like that container-ish item that you can run on your own. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So speaking of that, can you break down? There's a couple different solutions out there, and I won't name names because we never do, but there's a really big one that is kind of out there that seems to fit for most cases, but it tends to be really expensive too. Can you talk through kind of what that landscape looks like kind of around all of the different kind of startup off things that are happening versus the legacy ones and things like that in the market?
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of established that auth is this big, hairy, non-optional problem, right? You have to solve it somehow. It's critical to your function, critical to your business, critical to the users experiencing your product or service. And there's kind of only three ways to solve it, right? It's roll your own. So hire smart people, say, hey, build me an auth platform and maintain said auth platform in perpetuity, right? That's taking a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. It may or may not be anywhere near your core competency as a business, but it's a path you can take. The second one is an open source offering. Find a project that does most of what you want and assemble it and maintain it. So it's sort of adjacent to the true roll your own strategy, but you kind of get some components and some benefit of the tailwind of the community, which is again a viable option. And then the third and final option is pick a vendor and a partner. And the vendor and partners kind of come in two flavors. There's the large scale, large cap enterprise vendors. A lot of them have been acquired and assembled in with other technologies, and they're under some interesting pressure, right? So from these large scale companies, there's some that have been purchased by large PE firms and bundled together with adjacent technologies. There's some that have been acquired by public companies, and this was all in the era of super cheap money. So lots of these companies have been acquired for huge prices, and they've spent the next 4 earnings calls in a few cases saying we need to lower the operating cost of the business and increase the ARR per customer. Okay, what does that mean? That means they're going to lower investment in the product, lower the quality of support, and figure out new ways to increase the price and charge for different behavior patterns in the platform. And also, most of these platforms are multi-tenant SaaS offerings. So they're built with a shared application backplane and this whole concept of shared tenancy on a massive service. And that means they're designed fundamentally to serve the most common denominator, not your parameters and your use case and your workload. So there's this interesting moment in the market where these big players have huge market presence, but they don't have a very happy story for a lot of the customers who are now experiencing some of the squeeze and the downward pressure of these sort of amalgamations of technologies and the sort of pressures and pricing associated with what it means to do that in 2023 when you purchase them for really big numbers a couple years ago.
Yeah.
On the other side is the startup piece, where lots of small companies have raised a bit of money and said, hey, we're going to make this easier, faster, cheaper, smaller, better, more nimble. All those things are laudable goals, but the vast majority of these startups simply haven't run at scale before. And FusionAuth is very different than that because we're kind of a third lane where we're not a multi-tenant SaaS offering that has this huge downward pressure from an acquisition and a lot of the sort of slower pace that comes with these bigger entities. We're still able to act like a small startup and move very fast. And yet we have the ability for you to download and run FusionAuth locally, and our customers can have a voice in our roadmap. They can open GitHub issues around the product and really talk to us about what they want to see. And we've been tested at scale with some of the biggest brands in the world. So it's something I'm really proud of because we found a way to sort of solve both benefits of the small, nimble startup model, as well as the production ready enterprise scale that we want to serve for a huge number of our customers.
I think there's maybe some confusion, and we can provide a little bit of clarity, I hope. When we
Mhm.
say multi-tenancy, right?
Mm.
When you're up in the kind of a different SaaS provider and they have like multi-tenancy, you don't see that like going into. You're like, I signed up as Alex Patterson for my org, and my org has its own thing. It's not sharing anything. Can you break down like FusionAuth has the idea of like single tenant, but like we also have a little bit of multi-tenancy in there. What's that mean for us
Yeah, so
versus them?
that's a very good call out. I apologize for not being as clear as I could have been. So, what I mean by a single tenant solution or a multi-tenant solution is every customer of FusionAuth gets a complete dedicated copy of FusionAuth deployed for them. And the only variables that matter when you start talking about a commercial relationship with FusionAuth is infrastructure, software tier, and scale. So the infrastructure choice is where you talk about tenancy. You can deploy FusionAuth on a single VM just for you. Cool. You can deploy FusionAuth on a Kubernetes cluster that you self-host. You can deploy it on your laptop, wherever you want. But the decision around infrastructure is based on the level of performance and fault tolerance and data isolation that you need, right? Our highly available configuration is a complete dedicated copy of FusionAuth for you on a dedicated set of EC2 instances with an RDS pair behind it, and they're all behind an ALB.
Yep.
So we can pick any region in the world and we can say, cool, we're going to spin up the right scale of app servers for you, the right scale of database, and serve that. If you need, regional fault tolerance, we can set up a DR story. But our highly available infrastructure is AZ diverse and is FusionAuth spun up in one specific AWS region. And if that's not, isolated enough for you, we're happy to provide you a license key that you can run locally, even air gap should that need arise. But the idea
Perfect.
is every customer has a complete copy of FusionAuth, which then they can slice up into multiple tenants or lots of different applications within a tenant as needed, right? There's lots of different reasons you'd have subsets of slicing and dicing in the user population.
Love
Does
it.
that help?
It absolutely helps. I think it ties into this next question. I skipped a couple questions because I'm going to save them for the end, but this one fits perfectly. So, do more customers choose FusionAuth because they don't want to roll their own, or because they don't want to maintain it once they build
Yes.
it? Yes.
So I think
Good
that
answer.
it's a very good question because there's kind of two paths that might lead you to FusionAuth. The first is a developer building an application from scratch, and they don't yet have a big population of users, but they certainly don't want to roll their own. So they look around for what can I pick up and sort of plug in as my auth story as I build this thing, and they may or may not choose FusionAuth, but a lot of them tend to. And then there's the other path where some workload has been built that has real production scale, and somebody who's on the hook to maintain some SLA to their customers or some experience to their customers says, I see risk here. It's this old janky rolled self built auth system. We should find a technology we can pick up and operationalize that's built on standards that uses all of the standards to interact and to implement things like SSO and 2FA and all these different sort of standard protocols. We need to figure out a way to sort of pull that forward and take it off our plate, because our core competency is not building an auth platform. Let's find somebody who does this as their business. And so we kind of do that, whether we come up the sort of home built path by a developer who doesn't want to build it themselves, or they have an existing workload. It's kind of a little bit different persona, but both of them are very frequent in our new logo and new customer conversations.
And now that FusionAuth is kind of becoming more well known, do you see people taking and running kind of their own instance of FusionAuth and going, okay, we're at this kind of peak moment that like we've been maintaining this, we're over X amount of users, and it's starting to like, whew, our systems are really like throttled. Let's push this off to FusionAuth to host so we don't have to take care of it. Is that kind of another path that you see people taking?
Yes and no. So we
Okay.
have plenty of customers that love the fact they can self-host, and we worked with a large retailer whose core infrastructure team came from Blizzard Activision, and they're super used to running infrastructure at scale. They're pros at this. They run lots of applications at scale, and they didn't care at all to just add FusionAuth among the list of applications they run. And they love the fact they could just do it, right? Like, oh, cool, we can just deploy this against our existing Kubernetes cluster or clusters. And it's just another line item that we're maintaining at scale with large traffic for a very, very multi-million monthly active user retailer. And that was a great fit for them. It's almost no additional burden to their existing operations to host it themselves. On the flip side, we have customers that say, okay, for compliance reasons, I want all of my data to stay in Canada. And, we already are compliant in our existing data center. We don't know it has, super long-term plans, but let's just run it in our data center. We can still check the box about nothing's leaving our data center from a data isolation and sovereignty point of view. Let's just deploy it there. And then as their strategy evolved, they said, oh, you can run this in the Montreal AWS data center. Ooh, that's very nice. We can offload the task of supporting this application, and it costs a sort of negligible uplift from the underlying compute costs to you. So cool. We'll just offload it to you, and we'll start consuming a hosted version of FusionAuth that looks and feels just like the one we were running before. Still have the benefit of single tenancy, and they can kind of wipe their hands of the operational burden of running it.
Nice. Love it. Covers
Yeah.
both. Appreciate the breakdown on those.
Yeah.
I have kind of this question. I think it's the right time to ask it now.
Mhm.
From Dan, he says, "What are some ways CIAM?" And first, let's break that down. Can specifically can help a business thrive. So, what's a CIAM?
So IAM is familiar to most developers with identity and access management, right? And CIAM is customer identity and access management. So I like to think of it as IAM is typically employee identification, where an internal user of a product or service needs to identify themselves and have role-based access control and permission-based access to things, whereas your customers might have a different order of magnitude that you have to solve for and a slightly different set of problems that might drive complexity and challenges when serving it. So an easy example is customer identity and access management are the users of a fantasy football application. The employee identity and access management are the builders of said application that also need access to the systems that help support it. So different problem statement, usually several orders of magnitude different in total user count, and a little bit of a different kind of story around it. But how does that help? So CIAM, you want it to be performant, you want it to be convenient, you want it to be reliable, and you want it to be fundamentally secure. So ways you can make it help your business. It matches the look and feel of the underlying application that you're providing access to. It has a social login button. So log in with Facebook, log in with Apple, log in with these other IDPs that are available. It is a seamless experience where you can insert custom marketing consents. You can insert custom click-throughs and age gating if you have content that requires age gating, like some of our gaming companies have. There's lots of different ways where a well thought out implemented SIAM solution can make less friction and apply the level of control and user experience and frankly feedback back to your application team around what users are doing in a way that it helps the business. So there's lots of ways to make it add value, but fundamentally it needs to be clean, fast, performant, and preferably lightweight, like a really seamless experience. A
I think
user shouldn't
maybe
be bogged down in.
I think something to add to that too is like we talk one fantasy football app, but now you're talking like the website of it, the mobile side of it. You have the
Mhm.
back end tracking. Like every application you have can hit this central instance of users, right? So you can tie in all of that between our mobile SDKs, our JavaScript SDKs, like you name it, and API is available for all of this. And maybe they have different flows that are unique to it. I think you kind of touched on like internal pieces of that application too. So
Yeah.
all of that is very important.
Just following up a little bit on that example we talked about is that a fantasy football provider is one of our customers, and it was fascinating because they also have a sports betting app, and the users of a fantasy football app are all free. They're all ad driven. They want to be super low friction, low password complexity, and that whole idea makes sense. But the sports betting app is a regulated industry that needs age gating, that needs location data. It touches financial institutions where you can like transfer money from a bank, so it needs two-factor auth. It needs a whole level of consents and approvals and extra rigor around that model. But they didn't want to introduce all of that friction in the ad-supported app. So one of the things we were able to do is pull forward a feature on our product roadmap to within one instance of FusionAuth, uh, enable a choice at the application level of all of these extra security controls, not at an instance or a tenant level. You could make the decision down at an app by app level within a tenant. And that's a pretty cool level of control. And it didn't occur to us until this customer brought it up a couple of years ago that it was necessary to make this level of control. And they wanted to do it with one instance of FusionAuth. And so that was something we were able to do. And we delivered it in about 8 weeks.
Nice. That's amazing. And the cool part is that if you pull the latest instance of FusionAuth, you get that essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah. Uh, the other piece there that like always is rattling around in my mind when you start to kind of tie those applications together. Sometimes you want them to exist as if they are all together. They're part of a family, right? Like you go to Disney Plus, you go to Disney this, you go to Disney that. Um, when you're doing that, you expect kind of that same login flow. But in other cases, they own ESPN and they might want to treat that separately, but you can do that too with the same amount of users with all the different applications broken up across them too. So when you start to talk like login flows, you get a completely different look of a login for each of those experiences, all tied back to that central FusionAuth instance.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things around, and we have a variety of customers out there that have done really extensive JavaScript and CSS customization to pull the objects forward from within a hosted login page and make it look just like the application that it's serving. And so you can really go nuts when it comes to customizing this, and that's something we're particularly proud of.
I'm looking at my cheat sheet over here because Mark and I said, there's certain things we got to cover, and we're kind of mixing it up a little bit back and forth. But I kind of want to get to this hard question for you, and you've said it kind of lightly, but when doesn't FusionAuth make sense? When shouldn't someone use it?
Totally. So we touched on it briefly, but every customer of FusionAuth gets a dedicated copy of FusionAuth. That means that there's sort of a minimum viable scale that's necessary to make it worth it, right? Think of a small business. Maybe
I
you're
think I
making
think
and
we said my
selling.
dad was making wooden bowls on
Perfect.
WordPress, right? That was
Yeah.
the example.
So the example of your dad making wooden bowls and selling them on the web and using a WordPress site and everything. FusionAuth is probably overkill for that use case, right? It's just not necessary. That might be a great fit for some of these cloud native offerings that are sort of bare bones login capabilities that might be useful, right? They're offered usually at low cost and very simplistic to implement, and that might be an ideal fit for one of those. Now, if this bowl business started branching out to selling Christmas ornaments, selling all kinds of services, selling all kinds of white labeled products to different brands. And all of a sudden, you're managing huge scale and you have a custom developed website and you have different user experience that need to look and feel like these different online stores. All of a sudden, you're going to start needing a more robust and a more configurable customer identity and access management solution. You can grow pretty far on the bare bones piece, but eventually there will be a level of control and a level of customization that you need, and that's where it kind of transitions to a full featured SIAM product being necessary, and one that you can deploy in your own infrastructure or consume as a hosted model is profoundly valuable.
Sure, that totally makes sense. Cool. Um, I'm gonna throw another question from Dan. What is the most unique auth integration you've seen? Can we talk
Unique.
about it publicly?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple. So unique auth integration. Uh, I think it's probably some of the gaming companies. So a lot of the gaming companies have just spectacular visuals, right? And that's super fun, right? They want to have specific IDPs show up as the preferred login path. Maybe it's Nintendo, maybe it's Steam, whatever. There's all these different IDPs they pull forward, and they can offer and apply specific policies to the username. So upon account creation, they can sort of force a certain pattern or set of rules on a specific field on the login page, and they can provide all kinds of sort of visual cues and prompts and consents associated with it. But it feels like you've never left the game. I know, as intellectually, that this is being rendered out of FusionAuth, but it's stunning how you can make it look and feel and match the experience that is expected from a user going to their favorite game, right? There's quite a few examples there. I'm not sure who I can reference publicly, but I would say the pulling forward specific IDPs in a way that matches the look and feel of the game, and then applying specific policies for account creation to make it match whatever the sort of baseline experience is that they're trying to put forward for the gamers.
Very cool. I'm gonna ask this question. Maybe you can or can't answer it. What's our largest customer that you know of, whether we are hosting or they are using FusionAuth, that you can talk about?
Okay.
Can you throw a name at me, like someone might know?
Yes, I can throw a couple names at you. So, Zenny Optical, for one, is an online retailer of eyewear. Take Two Games is a publishing house that works with game studios that publish big games. So, Take Two Games is the publishing house. They work with people like Private Division, Rockstar Games, and some of the titles under there are Kerbal Space Program under Private Division, or Grand Theft Auto under Rockstar Games. And the idea here is that we work with the publishing house that has a relationship down to the studios, down to the games itself. And then there's I don't know. I do a lot of yard work at my parents' place and steel chainsaws,
Oh,
for example.
that's STIHL, folks. Don't
Indeed.
confuse.
Indeed. Their like dealer login portal is used during using FusionAuth, right? And that one has decent scale. There's an online streaming radio company that talks about their total user count being in the tens of millions of users, and it's Odyssey, AUDACY.com. Might be OdysseyInc.com. I can't remember. But either way, it's an online streaming radio platform, and they publicly declare their user count. So it gets a little tricky for me to say how many users do we see on FusionAuth, because that's very much their information, their basis. But we can talk about some of the specific customers that have declared or been references for us that then publicly declare their user count themselves. So we're not
Sure.
breaching anything that's unfindable.
Very cool. I love hearing those names. I know we have a few internally that I've seen that I'm pretty wowed by that we can't talk about. So
Yeah.
I know there's big names out there using us, and it's pretty exciting.
Mhm.
What am I
Yes.
missing? What am I missing, Mark? What would you
So,
tell like a customer coming in that wants to buy Fusion Auth that I'm just completely blanking out on not asking you?
well, I think there's some core differentiation that's worth calling out, right? Our billing model is inherently simple, right? I touched on it earlier, but there's only three variables that we care about. It's the infrastructure, so ours or yours, and if it's ours, okay, we need to know how fault tolerant, what's the scale of the user population, what's the behavior pattern of that user population. But infrastructure is the first one. Software tier is the next, and we just have four software tiers, everything from free community edition all the way up to enterprise Fusion Auth, which is 24/7 support and all the features enabled, and then a couple middle steps in between. But it's organized basically from the level of criticality that it's expected for that workload. I sometimes say the level of production ready, but that's kind of imperfect because some production ready systems don't need crazy fault tolerance and availability, right? So the only three variables we care about are infrastructure, software tier, and then scale. And once we sort of define those three things, you have the system. You can use the system. We don't meter a limited number of tenants. We don't put a cap on machine to machine tokens, right? Like this concept of charging fees for behavior that doesn't have an underlying unit cost is the antithesis of what the relationship should be with the customer. If you have the thing, use the thing. We'll support you and help you do it, and you can make the infrastructure and architecture decisions that work for your business. Don't feel like you have to create some custom workaround to game the licensing because it's prohibitively expensive. That the tail shouldn't wag the dog, right? That's our kind of belief, and I think it's that comes through in how we work with customers. The last thing I would call out is access to engineering, right? We intentionally create an escalation path in our support organization to the core product engineers who write FusionAuth, and that's a function of being a small company at first, but it also drives really solid accountability that is super important for our customers, right? The product engineers themselves have a direct incentive to make sure the docs around every new release and every new capability are super good, because if they aren't, or if the software is crap, there's a way bigger support burden that directly gets escalated to the core product engineers. So it's this accountability feedback loop that creates and incentivizes a really good customer experience that I'm proud to represent, right?
Yeah, that probably we should probably cover something in the pricing model there that maybe we have touched on, but I just missed it. When someone is off and running on their own and all of a sudden they're like, kind of into it deep, like they haven't been paying for Fusion Auth. What's that look like from a support standpoint? Do they need to get on a model for us to support them? Do they need to switch to an enterprise plan? What's our kind of pricing and models for support?
Yeah, it depends on the capabilities they need, depends on the support they need. Uh, we're totally happy to have customers use our community edition in a totally unlimited way and as much as they want. There's no support associated with that because they're not paying for anything. There's no way we can support sort of every community user that way, but they have access to our forum and all the public resources available. And then if you need business day support, there's an essentials tier, and it has a few more advanced features available to you. And that, again, can be deployed locally or hosted by FusionAuth. And then the tier that is aligned for usually an SLA-backed or critical workload is FusionAuth Enterprise. And that's the one that has 24/7 support, has all of the sort of unbridled capabilities of FusionAuth. And we try to loosely correlate that with a sense of scale, but that's kind of where we can get creative on the contract side based on the behavior pattern of a given workload, right? Some tax software, for example, that has quite a lot of users 3 weeks before taxes are due in the spring is very different than CRM platform that has a huge population of users logging in at 9 a.m. and out at 5 p.m. And serves people every day across the planet, right? Very different behavior patterns in those user sets. We can price and reflect it accordingly. Same thing with super spiky traffic, like the Taylor Swift ticket phenomenon, where event becomes available, millions of people hit the website, and that is not a sustained pattern, but we can design a quote or design a structure that works to cover that and makes it cost effective and work for everybody.
Love it. Yeah. Cool. I'm just going to show off real quick, just so everyone can see it, how to get to kind of our community support area. So if you come up to developers, you can go to our community and forum. A big piece of this is probably in this post in our forum. So you can go out to this and hopefully it loads quick. There's all kinds of questions out here. That's it. There's also this cool thing. Once you're in our docs, if you want to try out this Ask AI, we've just added this. So you're stuck, it's the middle of the night, you don't have a support plan, just come out here and say how to access JavaScript SDK, something like that. And it's going to like provide you everything from not only our forum, but our webpage. We're adding our YouTube to it. So you can kind of start to curate your own thoughts or like your prompts into this. And it's going to really direct you to where the right documentation is that you can go after, and show you a little example even. So definitely check that out. Mark, it's been a pleasure. I'm out of questions. We could probably talk all day just because I love your Thor hammer stories and things like that. But I think we should probably call it. What do you think?
So, sounds like a plan. I think, well, first, I deeply appreciate you having me on. And I think the biggest thing I want to leave somebody with is when you're considering auth and you look at the choices ahead of you, I can't find a reason you wouldn't partner with FusionAuth, and that's why I came to work here, right? The whole idea is that you have the choice of deployment model, you have a proven technology at scale, you can customize it and tune it for your specific use case, and you get direct access to the people that built it as a customer. And this is a problem you don't need to solve. Like you just pick up FusionAuth and you're off to the races. We can be an extension of your team solving a non-optional problem. And that's the most rewarding relationship to have with customers. So that's the sort of high five I want to leave you with, because it makes me happy to be here and represent a product that's just built well and a team that means it.
Yeah, same. I couldn't say it better. And apparently Mark thinks I couldn't say it better either, because we need more of your Mark guests. I think he's kind of hinting at next week we're bringing on another Mark too, by the way.
There are 3 Marks in the company, and
the month of November we're hitting them all. Just FYI.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, great.
The shortest Mark of the 3 of us, I think, is 6'2". So there's small Mark is still 6'2", medium Mark, and tall Mark. I'm medium Mark.
Yeah. Oh, you're medium Mark.
I'm medium.
My gosh. Yeah. I thought you were tall Mark. See, I have it all mixed up. Anyways, folks, we'll see you next week. We'll be back with another Mark, and appreciate it again. Take care.
Thank you.
When you build an app, writing a login, registration, and user management system seems simple. But pretty soon you're implementing complex standards like OAuth, OpenID Connect, and SAML. Plus, you'll need to build out additional login features. And don't forget all the acronyms you need to comply with. Secure Auth is not optional, but the time that it takes to build it is. Save time and use FusionAuth. FusionAuth provides authentication, authorization, and user management for any app. It's built for devs to deploy anywhere and integrate with anything in minutes. Seriously, anywhere, anything, and in minutes. FusionAuth installs on any platform, any device, anywhere in the world, including AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and other clouds. And it scales to hundreds of millions of users. To keep user data safe, FusionAuth provides all the controls you need to manage passwords and comply with security requirements and regulations. When users log in with FusionAuth, they'll see your brand, not ours. Theme login pages, style emails, and localized messages to ensure your brand is front and center. And FusionAuth comes with a pre-built management UI to manage and report on users. So stop grinding on auth and go build something awesome. Get started using FusionAuth for free. Wait, for free? Are we sure that's supposed to be like that?